Right, so you're not indiscriminately accepting anybody who wants to buy your franchise. It's very much like you described it, an interview process as well.
Certainly. It's very similar to in marriage or in dating. When you choose your partners in life, you don't accept everybody and anybody that comes along the way. So likewise, we always say franchise is like a marriage, whereby it is actually a long-term marriage. And once you get married, you hope you do not have to take out the franchise agreement to argue on the nitty-gritty details again. So likewise, a franchise is like a marriage. You aim to choose the correct partner, the right partner to expand your business, because the brand to many of the business owners is just like their own baby.
We're talking to Gary Lowe today, the director of PurpleClay Consulting, finding out what we need to know about running a franchised business. When we continue in just a little bit as well, we'll talk more about the monetary advantages of why a company would want to start a franchise, and also the nature of the relationship between the franchisor and the franchisee, as Gary described it, almost like a marriage of two different parties. We'll continue that in just a little bit, and if you've got a question, call in 669-11938.
938 Live. 938 Live. Gets you talking.
Thank you very much for staying with us. Indeed, we continue now with Gary Lowe. Gary is the director of PurpleClay Consulting, and part of his work involves advising clients on how to go about franchising their businesses and helping potential franchisees get off the ground with their own franchises as well. We're finding out what we need to know about running a franchised business. Gary, thank you very much once again for being with us. Before we continue our conversation, I'd like to remind our listeners that you can call in if you'd like to ask Gary a question about the topic. 669-11938. 669-11938 is our number. So, Gary, for someone who is looking to start his or her business, why should this individual choose a franchise instead of starting something from ground up?
Essentially for, I would say, two main reasons. One reason would actually be the savings in terms of time and experience and the knowledge that the franchisee can be expecting from the franchisor. I think contrary to popular belief, a lot of franchisees or individuals or candidates may actually feel that, no, if I buy a franchise, I'm going to spend X amount of dollar on the franchise fee, I'm going to pay a recurring Y percentage on the monthly gross sales, and why not I start my own brand instead? But I think the franchisee or the candidate will have to recognize and identify that there's such a thing called time that we can't really quantify. So it's really about the time savings in terms of getting your system up and running, in terms of getting your outlet up and running, which will inevitably actually save you time and money in the long run. And I think the other main reason would actually be to leverage on the brand and the awareness that's already been established by the franchisor. So in taking a franchise, you are really not only learning the expertise and the knowledge of the franchisor, but at the same time, you are actually acquiring the goodwill that the franchisor has established in the market for you to leverage on.
You paint a very rosy picture, but are there restrictions, though, that prevent the franchisee from doing what he or she wants with the business or the franchise that he or she has just acquired?
So certainly. I think in every relationship, be it contractual or non-contractual, there's always the downside to it. There's always the dark side, if we can call it. Certainly, I think the franchisee would have to identify a few factors that they may want to consider before jumping into getting a franchise. I think first and foremost, the franchisee has to identify the concept. Again, in an ideal world, we would want to say that hopefully it is a proven concept. A proven concept, however, of course, will entail higher franchise fee, or what we call a joining fee, as compared to a less well-known brand. So whether is it a proven concept or not, I think the franchisee will have to keep his or her eyes open, assess it on its own credibility, and decide whether is this the franchise for him or for her. If possible, try to speak to existing franchisee. You may, most unlikely, you won't be the first franchisee. So I think there are points of reference that you can take from. Speak to existing franchisees, understand from them the journey that they have taken, they could actually end up becoming your mentor, telling you whether is it a worthwhile franchise to pursue.
What are the kind of questions you should be asking the existing franchisee if you have that conversation?
I think one of the few questions that you might want to highlight and pinpoint would be the amount of support given by the franchisor to the franchisee. Many a times as a franchise consultant, we come across franchisors, complaining about the franchisee and vice versa, but most of the time it is always about the lack of support given by the franchisor to the franchisee.
What kind of support should the franchisor be giving to the franchisee?
I think effectively a few areas. If we are to zoom down on three main areas, it will actually be marketing support, because at the end of the day, you are joining the franchise as a family, so you would actually be looking at the economies of scale in terms of marketing, advertising and promotional activities. So this might be one area that you would want to understand from the franchisor. What exactly is the kind of marketing and advertising and promotional support that they are giving you?
Whose obligation is that? Whose responsibility is that? Is it the franchisor's or the franchisee's obligation?
Works both ways. Most franchises do have a national budget, meaning that the franchisor collects a certain percentage or a certain fixed amount on a monthly basis, and the franchisor is committed to actually invest these marketing dollars to its best usage to grow the brand. So for that, the franchisor has the responsibility to share with the franchisee on how is this fund being used. But on the other hand, some agreements do require the franchisee to spend an additional amount on localized marketing. So for example, if we're talking about overseas franchise, there could be a A&P fund, advertising and promotional fund, given to the franchisor to grow the brand as a whole. But then let's say, for example, you are a franchisee, say in Jakarta, and you would actually have to spend another separate marketing fund to grow your brand in Jakarta.
All right, we're having a very good conversation today with Gary Lowe, who is the director of PurpleClay Consulting, finding out what we need to know about how to go about running and sustaining a franchised business. We'll continue this conversation in just a little bit. Stay with us here on Need to Know on 938 Live.
938 Live gets you talking.
Gary Lowe continues with us right now, director of PurpleClay Consulting. Gary, let's talk about the business of revenue sharing between the franchisor and the franchisee. Obviously, the franchisor wants to gain some benefit from licensing the franchise. You don't do it for free or out of the goodness of your heart. So what's the arrangement when it comes to the revenue or the profit sharing?
Sure. A few fees are involved in a franchising relationship, or I should say a typical franchising relationship. There's always an upfront initial fee. We call it the franchise fee. Some laymen may call it a joining fee. This franchise fee gives you the rights for X number of years in a certain territory. The fees really depends on the arrangement. Depends on whether is it a single unit franchise or a master franchise. So fees may range from a couple of thousands to even millions of dollars.
Right. Well, what's the difference between a single unit and a master franchise?
A single unit franchise is really the rights given to open one location within a territory, whereas a master franchise would be something like the entire region of Jakarta or maybe the entire city of Kuala Lumpur. So that we will call it a master franchise.
All right. And when it comes to the profit sharing, the revenue sharing, how does it go about?
Okay. For a franchise system, beside the franchise joining fee, they tend to be a recurring royalty fee, typically paid out as a percentage of the monthly gross sales. And the royalty fees typically range between as low as even 2% to as high as 18 or even 40%. It really varies according to the business model of the franchisor.
And is this negotiable between the franchisee and the franchisor, or is it usually fixed?
I would say there is a fair amount of negotiations as a package between the franchisor and the franchisee. But I think by and large, the franchisor, having already established the system, would be more unwilling to budge too much when it comes to the franchise fee and the recurring royalty.
When we talk about rental of flats, rental of property, we have this term, we sublet the place. Is there a similar concept when it comes to franchising? Can you sub-franchise a franchise?
You could sub-franchise a franchise. That's when in the master franchise agreement, there will be certain terms given whereby the master franchisee can actually sub-franchise within the territory, probably after they establish X number of outlets or they have already reached a certain size, then they will be given the permission to sub-franchise their entire master franchise arrangement.
How strong is the government support for the franchise market here in Singapore in terms of government grants, for example?
The government does assist franchisor wannabes, or rather say franchisors who wants to establish their franchise systems with what we call a capability development grant.
Homegrown companies who want to expand overseas.
Yes, only homegrown companies whereby they are established in Singapore, incorporated locally, with at least 30% of local shareholdings, and of course of a certain sales and profit size. They can actually approach the government agencies, namely I believe it's IE Singapore and Spring Singapore, to check with the officers for the different kind of grants available for their franchising roadmap.
All right. Wonderful conversation, very informative as well. We're talking to Gary Low, who is the director at PurpleClay Consulting, finding out what we need to know about running a franchised business. Gary's website, the company's website, is www.purpleclay.com.sg. Gary Low, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Yo.